Okay, we're going to call the legislation meeting to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderman Kennedy. Alderman Boyd.
Present.
Alderman Arnowitz. Here. Alderwoman Hubbard.
Present.
Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Murphy. Here. Alderwoman Howard. Here. Alderman Ogilvy.
Here.
Alderwoman Navarro. Here. Chairman Vaccaro.
Present.
President Reed. 9 present. You have a quorum.
So, a couple things. Just Board Bill 193 has been asked by the sponsor to hold it, so we're going to be holding that. And just for the sake of clarity, I have a statement that I actually prepared, and it just simply says, while we are not taking public testimony on any board bill being held today, that there will be the opportunity for public testimony in future committee hearings before any action is taken out by this committee. We're not doing committee substitutes. We're only here today to listen to the sponsors, to get an idea of what they have in mind. Then we will go out in the public and do at least 1, if not 2 hearings. And I'm going to kind of let the sponsors determine the time and not quite maybe the place. I'm not sure yet. We may be doing them up here, but they'll be in the evening when people that have jobs can actually make it. So we're going to start with this morning with Board Bill 194. Should have. Okay.
Chuck. Good morning.
Yes, Alderman, if you can just give us an idea of what you have in mind on this bill.
Well, the reason for this bill is that we're one of the few metropolitan areas, or one of the few, I guess, governing bodies in the metropolitan area to require our employees to live in the boundaries of the city of St. Louis. In discussion with the Director of Personnel and other agencies that are under the city government, it's difficult to recruit people with that as a requirement. Many times we can get tradesmen that may live outside the city, but you know, many of these jobs are $30,000 to $40,000 a year. It's difficult to get people to relocate for those types of jobs. I think that we would open, you know, our city to possibly widening our net of trying to hire people. When we look on the city websites, many of the positions have been advertised for quite some time. I just think that maybe we ought to put this out there and put it to the voters and let them decide, because it is a change in the city charter. I believe that, you know, if we widen our net, we can probably get more qualified employees. I think that, you know, living in the city may be something we want to explore as offering a bonus for people that choose to live or stay in the city as a condition of their employment, but I don't think it should be a requirement for employment. The city properties are getting more expensive, especially if you have a family. It's hard to find homes in the city, you know, within a range that a person making, you know, $30,000 to $40,000 a year can afford. So that was the thinking on this. Are there any questions?
Well, just a comment, and maybe you can. My understanding is the new police officers that are being hired, then they don't get the same 7 years and they're able to move. They have to stay in the city as a permanent resident, right?
That's correct.
Okay,
And since the firefighters also, since the school district is now accredited, that's the word I'm looking for.
Okay, Alderman Kennedy, any questions?
No questions.
Alderman Boyd, any questions?
Not at this time.
Alderman Arnowitz, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think, as you well know, Alderwoman, I did the residency stuff for 10 years.
Yes, and we had discussions about that.
So, I mean, the 10 years that I did it, I can tell you there's at that time was over 200-plus people living out of the city.
So what you did was you enforced the residency requirement. At
Yes.
this time, we have
Yes.
no one enforcing that residency requirement. Is that correct?
And that's correct. And, I mean, I still believe it's
apologize.
crazy. When the police department was under the state, after 7 years, they could move. I think the firemen end up going to court using the school system, and they got the same deal after 7 years. They could move because at times schools weren't accredited and things like that. There is a lot of departments in this city, and I can tell you that we have trouble maintaining employees because of residency, and one of the biggest ones actually is forestry with tree trimmers. Nobody wants to move in from Jefferson County or Hillsborough or wherever they live, because the biggest part of tree trimmers that apply are from outside the city.
And we currently pay people extra to go to the airport
Yes.
because they're city employees working at the airport.
And I mean, if this bill passes, I don't really think there would be this big flight of city employees leaving, because a lot of them's already vested here. So, you know, we're moving to the time and the ages. I mean, St. Louis County has no residency. I know years ago, I ran into a gentleman that lived in Boston to work for their city up there, but they had to live in the city up there. I thought it was just us, but there was a couple places in different cities they do have to live. But a lot of that is getting lifted now, going to voters. I've been reading over years.
Well, and I think as we move into more telecommuting and people working, you know, doing work from home, I think it'll also come to be more frequent that it won't be necessary.
I
So,
know.
but I mean, I think that the city has amenities that we can offer that people would enjoy living in the city if we offered them maybe some bonus to their employment.
And
So-
that's true, because I know they have a problem with corrections. You know,
Recruiting,
they
right.
like to hire outside also, just because it is corrections, and we all know somebody lives in the city that probably gets locked up and happen to work there, so. All right, well, thank you for talking about this. I appreciate it.
Alderwoman Murphy.
Yeah, sorry. Just a comment. Were you planning on having like public discussions about this, Alderwoman?
I would like to have public input because I believe the residents, you know, ultimately they're going to vote on it because it is a
Right.
change to the charter of the city of St. Louis. And I think that maybe getting some input beforehand, before we put it to the voters, I don't want to have a special election for this. I would put
Right.
it on the August ballot. That's why I'm getting, you know, this out there now, so that we can have some feedback and test the waters to see what the climate is for it. You know, when you put constraints on people, you know, applying for a job, I think you kind of limit your pool of applicants. So, and I think that most people that live in the city are pleased to be here and happy to be here. And since we don't, you know, we have a lot of opportunities for education for our children here in the city, there's a lot more to be offered as we move forward. I think people will want to move in the city. The problem I see is that properties that, you know, house families are getting very, very expensive. So it's expensive to relocate if you're relocating for a $30,000, $40,000 job and you have a family. So.
And then another thing, were we considering, I know at one time there was a limit to how far someone could live away, like for the police and fire. I
That might
forget
be
what the
something
limit
that
was.
we need
Because
to
of emergency,
consider.
if they're
Right.
called, they had to be within a certain
Boundary,
distance.
and that's something I had at
Okay.
first, but it was trying to figure out what is that boundary, you know,
Right.
maybe
Yeah,
an
I
hour's
forget what it
drive, but
was.
it's, I think it's something we need to consider as, including in the bill, especially for the emergency situations that may arise.
Right. Okay, that's all, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
My apologies. I for whatever reason, passed over my office mate Alderwoman Hubbard, any questions? And I apologize, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, then let's go to Vice Chairman Ogilvy. Any questions?
Thank you. I guess I'd just say this is a very substantial change to the way we've been doing things for a long time. I think there's probably valid arguments on both sides. But I would kind of want to look before we leap here, because once we do this,
It's a change in
we're
the
not
charter.
going back. If
Right.
it's bad, we're stuck with it.
Right.
So, I mean, personally, I would want to have some type of survey or study of current employees asking, what they are likely to do. I'd want to consider some other options besides just a straight, no limit on where you live. Maybe there's a time limit. You have to live here for a certain number of years. When you start the job later on, you can move. Maybe there is a bonus, but if you do live in the city, I just think we should consider a bigger menu of options than just completely repealing the residency requirement. Because I do think, clearly recruiting is an issue for some positions. There's no arguing about that. But the flip side is that I think there's value in having employees be sort of vested in our community and being our friends and neighbors. I think that is a good thing. So, I'd want to see, because this is such a big change, I think I would want to see some real kind of data and a list of options we could consider before we move forward.
What data being?
Well, I think we could, first of all, we'd want to look at what positions do we really have a consistent problem recruiting for.
Okay.
I know that they have issued waivers for some of those positions in the past. When they really had a hard time filling positions, they issued residency waivers. So that continues to be an option. And I'd want to know what, if we don't have to survey every employee, but if we surveyed sort of a representative sample of employees, I would want to know, would you leave? If it means, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 employees leave, that's 10,000, 15,000 people when you factor in their families.
Families and so forth, yeah. So,
and I prefer they don't leave, so.
Well, but I think that as Alderman Arnowitz mentioned, at this point, there is no enforcement. So I don't know that, I don't want to cast a light of people being deceitful, but you kind of wonder if there is no enforcement, why are we even doing this?
Well, we could do some level of enforcement, I would assume. But anyway.
I guess that's part of my mission here with this bill, is that since we're not enforcing it, why do we have it? We make it a prerequisite for employment, but then after people are here and have the job, there's no one to say that they actually still live here.
Right. I think rules, though, my guess is that most people follow this rule, even if it's not.
I would expect most of our employees have that integrity.
I'm sure there's some cases where they don't, or where they're kind of bending the rules, but the fact that there is a rule, I think, probably, like most laws are not enforced 100% of the time, but I think that most people probably abide by that. But I just think there's a gray area here between 100% residency, which we have right now.
We hope.
Right, but the rule is 100%, and no residency requirement at all. I think there's a lot of space in the middle of that to figure out.
I think incentivizing the residency requirement, I don't think that making the incentive part of the city charter would be judicious or something we would want to do because of the budget constraints and what would be available, but I think as this would evolve, I think we could add an incentive to those people that, either remain or relocate to the city.
I mean, I just, we could survey applicants too, to jobs. I mean, we could compile some information before we attempt to make a decision on this to say, you applied for this job, does the residency requirement, how big a factor is that in your decision?
Well, but I guess the thing is that when you look on the website and you're an applicant and it said, must relocate to the city, that might keep people from applying. So.
It does, but maybe I think it's 90 days right now. I mean, maybe we look at that. Maybe it's 180 days. Maybe it's a year. I think those are, because I understand if you've got, if you own a house and you got 2 kids in school, you're not going to want to move, especially for a more entry level.
$30,000 to $40,000.
Right, a more entry level position. I understand that, but so
Well,
but
these are options that
Right.
can be explored and things that we can look at, and I'm open to that. I think this is something that, we need to grind into and offer some options, and possibly before we put it through before the voters.
Okay, thank you.
And there'll be, on this one especially, there'll be quite a few public hearings, so we can get, so we're not going to rush through this. President Reed and Alderman Guenther, no questions over here. Anybody? Alderwoman Davis?
She has her hand up.
Come on. Why don't just come
Mr.
join-
Chairman, could I have an opportunity to ask a question?
You know what?
Oh, you forgot about her?
I apologize.
No problem, thank you.
Alderwoman Navarro, we're going to start with you, and I apologize. I got a cold. I'm taking cold medicine, and my brain is like toast.
No problem, thank you. Thank you. I agree with Alderman Ogilvie in terms that it'd be nice to have some more information in terms of, how many waivers are given out, which positions do we see a need where it would be helpful to start recruiting outside of the city. The other question or concern that I have is that we've had a lot of conversations recently about the importance of community policing, and I just wonder how this seems like this might be kind of counteracting that sort of priority that we have people who work for the city, especially police officers that live in the communities where they work. And so now we are essentially saying that's not a priority. And I mean, there's a lot to balance there, but I do think that on the one hand, we're saying we want people living in the community, and community policing is really important to us, and then on the other hand, we're saying we're going to start recruiting from outside communities. So I'm just curious if that's something that you've thought about and how that might play out with this bill.
I have thought about that, and, I have police officers that live nearby me, and I don't see that them, hammering a for sale sign into their lawn if this passes by the voters. I think they're vested. I think, like myself, because I'm an alderwoman, but as a city employee, would that cause me to move? I don't think so. I think that it would open a wider pool for recruitment, and hopefully the city will be, I would like people that, want to stay here, not have to stay here. I think that puts a different light on it, a different spin, and if we incentivize it, it may further, get people to want to stay in the city. We have several police officers that no longer live in the city at this point because they were allowed to move out on the 7-year plan. So going forward, is this a deterrent to recruiting qualified police officers? I don't know. That would be a conversation that we need to have. Are we able to recruit? Last I heard that we were having a hard time recruiting youngsters, and now, to come into the police department. And that could be just the current social climate, or is it because they have to relocate to the city? I don't know, but that would be a survey that, as Scott said, or as the alderman from the Alderman Ogilvie said, maybe that's something we want to explore. Are we not recruiting our best people to be law enforcement because they have to relocate to the city? Or would there be something to incentivize them to move into the city and become part of our police department and fire department and an employee for the city of St. Louis?
And do you know if we have training programs for things like forestry? Are we doing any sort of training of residents who live in the city so that they are trained for these jobs that we're having a hard time recruiting for?
You mean before they're employed? I would say no, not before they're employed, but they would have to move into the city and be employed, and
Right,
then
yeah, I'm talking
they
about
would get-
before they'd be employed, so that if we know if we have a need for urban foresters, for example, I'm just curious if we have any sort of job training programs.
Yes, there
Because
is.
we have plenty of people in the city who need jobs, and what sorts of programming that we're providing so
But
that they
that's
can be trained
after,
for those.
the training comes once they've taken the job,
Right, so I'm suggesting that maybe one of,
pre-employment.
so maybe another solution to this problem is that we find ways to train residents in the city so that they're qualified to apply for these positions if we have a need. So I was just curious if
I
that's
don't
been
know if that would
explored.
be an option, but it's something to explore.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, and again, I apologize. This cold medicine has me in so Alderwoman Davis.
Thank you. Alderwoman Howard, I have great concern about the bill. When I look at, I think we're, what about almost 6,000 employees for the city of St. Louis as a whole, and say if only 25% immediately left the city, that would be devastating to the city of St. Louis. It would be devastating to so many things that happen in the city of St. Louis. I also know that the majority of the police officers who do live in the city, the neighborhoods that they live in, the blocks that they live on, it's very different. And I talked about this at my last 2 neighborhood meetings, and my residents are very upset about it because they believe that if you promote that this city is not good enough for you to live in, then why should you even work here? And that is a very negative. So for me, it gives the opposite effect when I'm thinking about it, that why would I even apply there if you don't think it's good enough for me to live there? Why should I even want to work there? So I would think it would have the opposite effect. And it sends a very negative message to the region as a whole. We've gone through this before on a major scale at least 3 times that I'm aware of in the last 20 years. And every time it came out with needing and wanting to have our police officers in our communities. We have given all kinds of incentives which really helped for them buying homes. Now we just started a new incentive for recruitment through the personnel office, giving some funds if you recruit someone and they actually go through the academy. Those are the kinds of initiatives that I think we need to work on because we haven't done marketing properly. That's one of the things that we need to take the blame for as a city, that we have not marketed our city at its best, and most especially with all the resources that are needed for the police department. When I look at the county, and I'll give you an example, they even have a recruitment process where they start with middle school children, and they get to learn about the police department and what police officers do. They do community service, and the process takes them all the way, and we already have some who have joined St. Louis County Police Department. So we need to go back to that process. We used to have that here and open it up fully like we did before. But we only dealt with teenagers, but I think we need to start earlier because young minds develop earlier now. So I hope we have a chance to actually look at this process and talk about some alternatives before we say every employee just leave the city.
I don't see it as that. I think that, the city, lifelong resident, I think the city has a lot to offer, and I think that if we incentivize people to move to the city, they will see that the city is a good place to live, work, and play, as we say. I think that opening that door and allowing people to come in rather than making it a condition of employment, I feel that that's sort of a servitude of some type that, in other words, if you're going to work here, you got to live here. And I think that, to me, puts more of a negative spin on it than, okay, if you move in here, we'll make some efforts to make some loans available to you to buy a home. We'll provide maybe some incentive for your salary to be here. I think that is something that we could provide and incentivize for people to live here in the city rather than making it a condition of employment.
Do you think the 7-year rule is too long?
I think the 7-year, to me, is rather, we're not enforcing the law as it is. We're not enforcing the city requirement to live in the city at this point. I think maybe it would be interesting to see if we had that enforcement, how many people are actually living outside the city and giving an address in the city.
Well, we used to do that better as well.
We don't do it at all. So I think that we're kind of talking out of both sides of our mouths if we're saying you must live in the city, but there's no enforcement, and some people are living in the city and some people are not living in the city, and it's common knowledge that this happens quite a bit. And I don't know how much quite a bit is, and I don't really know that I want to pull that drape back because I think it's embarrassing. But if we're going to make laws, we need to enforce them, and I just don't see the point of having a rule on the books that's not being enforced.
Well, I know.
It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and I'd rather incentivize people to live in the city because it is a wonderful place to live, work, and play, as I said, and give them a little perk to be here than to make it to me, that's more negative. You have to stay here if you want to work here. And I think you kind of give that negative employment. Nobody really wants to live here, so we're going to make it a condition of employment. So, I hear your point, very much so. I've thought about that also. Will there be a mass exodus? I don't know if we can predict that.
Well, I know we're going to be having conversations about it, and of course, the public comments are just critical on this.
Absolutely.
I mean, just critical. I mean, even, I wanted school teachers to live in the city.
I think so, too.
When I grew up, I walked past my principal's house, and 2 of my teachers, that made a difference in my neighborhood. It made us act better as well. So, it would be great if we could.
And as a 30-year veteran of the St. Louis Public Schools, I see my students everywhere, here in the fire department, police department, as working for the city, I see a lot of my former students, and I'm proud of them. And I think that, that provides some continuity to the community, but when you make it a requirement, I think we kind of border on a negative connotation that, if we can't get people to live in the city unless we give them a job. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Alderwoman Green, if you want to come up, you can have the chair right here. Well, now they're all leaving. There you go.
Just one quick
Didn't
question.
mean to clear the room.
Is there a fiscal note attached to this?
No, there is not.
Do we have any comparable data from other cities that have rolled back their residency requirements on the number of people that then moved out of that city?
It would be interesting to get that.
Okay, that's something I would like to see, and then some kind of fiscal note looking at the, implications on our tax base if we're to, lose X number of people as a result of this. So that was just.
I will take care of that. Thank you very much.
Anyone on any other follow-up questions? Okay, since we don't have any more, we're obviously going to have public hearings and get a lot of public testimony.
Let's plan that for after the new year.
Right, after the holidays.
Okay.
It's going to be at your discretion. And,
Okay.
and
We'll set that up for January 2018.
That would
Okay.
that would be fine. Thank you
All right,
so much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to Board Bill 180. Alderwoman Green. Alderwoman Green, you're welcome to come up and speak about your bill.
everyone just gets one. They're all the same thing.
Okay. Alderwoman Green, you're welcome to speak on your bill. We're going to just ask questions. We're just trying to get an idea where these things, what your intention, what your thoughts are.
Okay.
There will be public testimony in meetings, in neighborhoods, at least one up here in the evening when everyone can make it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
And you know, you only asked me to hear this, 2, maybe 3 days ago, so I did all I could to put it on this
Yeah.
particular meeting, so.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So let's hear what you got to say.
So everybody is getting a binder, and it has a lot of resources, a lot of information in it. There's a table of contents in the beginning of it, and some of the things that I'll talk about today, the data to back it up is within this binder. And if there's other information that you want that's not included in here, I'm happy to take lists of that and notes of that throughout testimony today and get that to add to your binders at a later date. So Board Bill 180, oh, we need 2 more? Okay. I will get 2 more, I'm sorry. Okay. Board Bill 180 is really about how we use our police resources. And as I testify today, this bill will help to free up police resources to focus on real crime and take us in an important step toward full legalization and keeping people out of our criminal justice system. I'd like to take the next few minutes to really talk through the reasons for the bill, what the bill does do and does not do, the legal authority that we have to enact Board Bill 180, and the additional resources that are provided in the binder that has been given to you. So why Board Bill 180? Basically, Board Bill 180 sets priorities for our law enforcement efforts. It will save our police time and resources. By not enforcing laws pertaining to personal marijuana possession, our police department can start to focus on real crime and rebuild relationships between our community and police. It's no secret that we have a very high homicide rate in this city, and that it's been escalating or holding steady for the last 4 years, including in 2017. We need to be putting all of our resources into decreasing our homicide rate and solving these cases, not into petty marijuana possession. The ACLU released a report in 2013 entitled "The War on Marijuana is Black and White: Billions of Wasted Dollars on Racially Biased Arrests." The report found that in Missouri, African Americans and whites consume marijuana at the exact same rate. However, African Americans are 2.6 times more likely to be arrested or cited for marijuana possession. In the city of St. Louis, these statistics are even more dire. In the city, African Americans are 18 times more likely to have marijuana laws enforced against them, even though, again, whites and blacks consume marijuana, possess marijuana at the exact same levels. And that report is in your binder under tab 5. Also, to add to that, I have a letter that I would like to pass out from the ACLU, who is looking forward to testifying at a later date, but just outlining kind of some of that report and some of the reasons why they think it's important that we are not citing for marijuana offenses, that we are rather choosing not to enforce these laws. So the 2013 decriminalization ordinance was a very positive step in the right direction, and I know several of you on this committee were co-sponsors of that legislation. The problem is we're still unequally enforcing our marijuana laws, and state charges are still being filed against some who possess marijuana. I asked our circuit attorney for the data since decrim was passed for the number of marijuana, state-level marijuana charges versus other drug charges. Unfortunately, they do not track data based upon the substance type. So while they could give us information about all of the state drug charges, they could not differentiate for us which ones were marijuana, which ones were cocaine, which ones were heroin. And so we're trying to work on a different way to see how we can get that, that data. So But if the laws can't be applied justly, what we need to do is change those laws. As you'll see when we go through the specifics of the bill, it doesn't really matter if the fine is $100 or if the fine is $25 if the law is being unequally enforced. And this is why we need to work toward elimination of the fines. Another thing that I think is important to note is since we passed the decrim bill, there has been 842 citations that have been issued in the city of St. Louis. 704 of those had no other crime that was being committed when that citation was issued. So it was just for marijuana possession, which is showing us that the bulk of people who are possessing marijuana are just possessing marijuana. They are not committing any kind of other crime. So Board Bill 180 was first conceived about a year ago. New research was emerging regarding impacts of legalizing marijuana as a way to reduce the impacts of the heroin and opioid epidemic, a health issue that has really been gripping our city. I think there's probably not a single one of us in this room today who doesn't get complaints about needles in our parks and people who are breaking into vacant houses who are using, and we don't have the resources to deal with it. The research provided to you at the very end of your binder goes into all of that data about how marijuana laws and relaxing those laws and having legalization of marijuana does decrease the use of heroin and opioids. And you will also see that in the St. Louis region, we bear the burden of a disproportionate number of heroin deaths and opioid deaths for the entire state. In fact, in 2016, the city of St. Louis saw 256 deaths due to heroin or opioid overdoses. That is more than our homicide rate. These deaths are outpacing, these deaths this year are even outpacing last year and will probably end up with an even higher amount. This is a public health crisis, it's an emergency, and given the limited resources that we have as a city to be able to provide the level of treatment that we need to provide, we need to start looking at some innovative solutions. We also need Board Bill 180 to start to undo the toll that the war on drugs has taken on our community. We know that much of the crime rates in our city are driven by lack of access to jobs, adequate housing, food, and schools. When a person is convicted of a drug felony or a drug crime, even just for possession, it can haunt them for the rest of their lives. It can make them ineligible for federal government assistance programs, whether it be food assistance, housing assistance, access to federal student loans. These are all things that people get locked out of. This ineligibility, and this is important, only affects people who have been convicted of drug crimes. It does not impact people who have, it does not apply to people who have done violent crimes, just drug crimes. So by passing Board Bill 180, we'd be taking a very big step towards starting to keep people out of jail for basically a victimless crime, and and ensuring that people don't have a record that is going to follow them around for the rest of their lives. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of Board Bill 180. What does it do? It's pretty simple. It says that the city of St. Louis may not expend its resources to enforce laws that permit civil or criminal punishment as long as the individual possessing marijuana is 1, 21 years of age or older, and does not provide marijuana to somebody under the age of 21, does not possess more than 2 ounces of marijuana or more than 10 marijuana plants for cultivation for personal use. It does not, as long as a person does not openly and publicly display or consume marijuana except on private residential property that the individual owns or is given permission to consume on the premises by the owner. That the person does not display, possess, or consume marijuana within 1,000 feet of a school, that they don't display, transfer, distribute, sell, or grow on any city-owned street or sidewalk or other property that is owned by the city, state, or federal government, or any private land where the property owner has said that marijuana usage is not allowed on those properties. Thus, the laws surrounding open-air drug dealing and sales are still in effect and can be enforced by police. This bill also allows police to use probable cause if there's reasonable suspicion that the person is in violation of this ordinance or pieces of the original decriminalization ordinance. In other words, police can still search people if there's a reasonable suspicion to believe that the person is under the age of 21, is providing marijuana to somebody under the age of 21, possesses more than 2 ounces or 10 plants, aka they're possessing more than you would have for personal use. Is consuming, displaying, selling, transferring, or growing within 100 feet of a school on city, state, or federal property or private property where it's prohibited. So what it will do is this will limit interactions between the police and the community when it comes to personal possession of marijuana. It starts to remove the incentive to profile certain individuals when an investigation may not result in the arrest of the subject if they're in compliance with the rest of this ordinance. With petty cannabis possession off the table, police will be able to concentrate on more serious infractions, things that are of more importance. Board Bill 180 also establishes some protocols regarding marijuana consumption and employment. And this is something that I know has been more controversial part of this bill, and I'm willing to continue to work on it. And even if we think that this isn't something that we should be fighting in this particular bill, I'm willing to table that for a discussion for another day in order to get this passed. But some of those protocols include that it is not permissible to consume marijuana on the job, and any employer who wishes to maintain a drug-free workplace can prohibit the use of marijuana even during non-working hours. However, if an employer does not specify a drug-free workplace in their employee manual, then it becomes the default position of businesses in the city of St. Louis that people who work there cannot be fired solely for the use of marijuana as long as other conditions are met. So do we have the legal authority to do this is always the million-dollar question. So I think it's important to know that we probably went through a dozen iterations of this bill before we got one for introduction. Talking with a variety of different marijuana advocacy organizations, talking with different attorneys at the state, federal, and local level whose expertise is in this, talking with criminal justice reform advocates until we got something that we felt that was a legally defensible bill. This bill was drafted with the help of Missouri Supreme Court Justice, who's now retired, Mike Wolf. You can see in tab number 2 is the full legal analysis, and that had also been emailed to the bill, or to the committee. The former city councilor, Winston Calvert, Dave Rowland from the Missouri Freedom Project, as well as attorneys from the Marijuana Policy Project out of Washington, D.C., who helps cities to craft just marijuana laws. It was also written in consultation with a lot of marijuana advocacy groups and criminal justice reform groups. The city is well within its authority to prioritize our resources. In fact, I think we all know that police make decisions every day about which laws they choose to enforce and which ones they don't, and what they choose to prioritize and what they don't. This bill would not prohibit what Missouri statutes permit, nor would statutes prohibit because the bill is not there to support or is not there to unilaterally legalize marijuana. Rather, it states that as a matter of local policy, the city of St. Louis will not devote its scarce public safety resources to enforcing marijuana laws against otherwise law-abiding citizens. Article 1, Section 3 of the Missouri Constitution specifies that the citizens of the state have a, quote, inherent sole and exclusive right to regulate our police forces. This includes the right to direct and limit the way in which police conduct themselves, and the right to prioritize the enforcement of certain criminal laws over the enforcement of others. The city makes similar decisions every day, with police officers deciding when, how, and against whom to proceed with criminal charges, or more to the point, when to not pursue criminal charges. Furthermore, if enacted, Board Bill 180 would be akin to the United States Department of Justice's position on marijuana possession, known as the COHN memo, which is under tab 3 in your binder. And the COHN memo basically outlines a number of stipulations that state or local authorities should still abide by in order to relax marijuana laws, but still operate within the compounds of what the federal government deems acceptable. Jeff Sessions has not, as of this time, changed any of the COHN memo. None of that has been rolled back. The state government, you know, I get the question a lot of, well, can't the state just preempt us on this? The state government might attempt to pass a statute that would require local governments like us to enforce marijuana prohibitions. The problem with it is it would raise the question about whether the state has authority to obligate cities to direct their local resources in a manner that we have not chosen to do so, especially since under the Missouri Constitution, we have explicit local rights over our police department and how we use those resources. If the state attempts to try to require us to use our police resources in this way, then there would be very good grounds to excise a challenge under the Hancock Amendment. Because if they're telling us to use our police resources in a certain way, then they would have to provide the funding to also enforce those laws. The board bill as written gives us a very strong legal position from which to defend our ordinance if necessary. So what does this bill do and not do? There's been a lot of misinformation out there on this, and you'll see in tab 4, we did a lot of fact checking of some of the things that have been out there. So this bill does not legalize open drug sales, and it doesn't change any laws regarding illegal distribution, trafficking, and sales of cannabis. Police are not constrained and may continue to pursue and reduce crime in every legal way. In no place, and I'll repeat this, in no place in this country where sales of marijuana are legal are open drug sales legal. When you look at places where sales are legal, they have established dispensary networks, and the open air black market drug sales are still illegal under those laws. Board Bill 180 would provide a disincentive for person-to-person sales because it allows private home grow cultivation, which we know reduces illegal marijuana sales. Marijuana consumers will not engage with a drug dealer or a drug trafficker to purchase higher-priced marijuana when they can buy it, when they can grow it in their own home for the price of a tomato plant. This also does not change nuisance laws. It does not change, police can still investigate drug trafficking, distribution, and public consumption of cannabis and other drugs. Petty drug offenses under 55 grams or 2 ounces will not take a police officer off the beat for 4 to 5 hours to process an arrest, thus freeing up the officer to pursue crimes that have a true victim. This bill also does not prohibit employers from drug testing. If an employer's stated policy is to ban cannabis or any other drug use in the workplace, then the employer can terminate any employee who violates company policy. Employers can drug test and make decisions upon drug tests. Again, though, if it is in the employee manual that the employer requires a drug-free workplace, under this bill, a person could still be terminated. If it is not in the employee manual, then the default position would be that a person cannot be fired solely for testing positive for marijuana unless they are found to be impaired at work. One of the reasons we sought this is to start to end the stigma around marijuana usage and get us to a place where just like we're not stigmatizing the use of recreational alcohol, we are not stigmatizing the use of marijuana. The bill also does not establish a regulatory framework for dispensary sales. We tried and we wanted to, but our concern with opening the door to dispensaries now was that it would make this bill harder to be defended in court. Although I hope that we get to a place in the near future where we do allow regulated sales, we're not quite there yet. In places where sales are allowed, it's because there is a regulatory framework that has been established. I think that after medical marijuana is legalized statewide, hopefully in November, that will be the beginning of establishing a regulatory environment, which will then allow us to come back with more legislation to start to address the legal regulated sales of marijuana in the city. Right now, and I think this is important, our competitors across the river are looking at full legalization. We need to remain competitive if we don't want to see our entire entertainment and tourism revenues go across the river. And we need to start setting the stage now at a local level for if and when Illinois legalizes as soon as 2020. This bill will not increase crime in St. Louis. Public safety and public health will benefit by removing the profit incentive from drug gangs, cannabis dealers, and drug cartels to operate openly on the streets. Arrest and prosecution of petty cannabis possession crimes is a drain on police resources. More dangerous crimes with a victim need increased enforcement. In every state that has legalized marijuana use, opioid use has declined by 25% on average. The longer cannabis has been legalized, the greater the reduction in opioid usage has been reported. Cities and states that have legalized have seen no increases in crime rates after legalization. That documentation, as well as statements from law enforcement in those areas, are provided in your binder under 9, the Crime and Legalization tab. And I think it's also important to point out that as we're looking at saving police resources, if we decrease the usage of heroin and opioids in the city by 25%, on top of not enforcing these marijuana laws, we are looking at some significant reductions in the number of EMS calls, the number of police calls, the strain on our hospitals, the strain on our treatment centers. So I think there's some reciprocal savings that we can see from this if we start to set this up in the right way. So what are the consequences of 180? So one of the things, and I just started to talk about this, is that it will save the city money. Arresting an individual for a petty and victimless crime of possessing up to 2 ounces will not take officers off our streets anymore to process paperwork for cannabis users. The prosecutors, judges, public defenders, evidence labs, detention personnel, they'll all not be spending time and money on this. For example, Harris County, Texas, this is where Houston is located. In June 2017, they reduced all simple cannabis possession charges to a non-infraction. And it saved taxpayers $20 million a year in processing, prosecution, evidence testing, public defenders' costs, and jailing. The ACLU cites that in Missouri we spend $48 million annually on the enforcement of marijuana laws. We're currently in the process of aggregating that down into a local level. A bulk of those laws are being enforced against simple possession. Just since the implementation of the decriminalization ordinance that we passed, the City of St. Louis has prosecuted more than 800 incidences of marijuana possession in municipal court, and recently has been increasing enforcement of the decrim law. What we're also seeing is that places like universities, even if you have a municipal violation, can still deny you access, can still deny you entrance into a program, just because you have that, even with that municipal violation, even if it's not a felony. Research provided to you in your binder will also help to make the case that more people will actually want to move into the city if we take this step. People are starting to make decisions based upon marijuana laws. There's a whole, and you'll see in number 11, there's a whole group of people now that are called marijuana refugees. These are people who are living in pain, people whose children have seizure disorders, people who have cancer, people who have PTSD, who are looking for places where they can have easy access for personal use marijuana to address some of these issues. And I'll be honest, my father is one of them. So my parents live in New York right now, which is a medical state. The problem, though, is very few physicians will write scripts for marijuana because they're afraid of the implications on their medical license. And so as my father's getting ready to retire, he has something called essential tremors and fibromyalgia. My parents are looking at what states, what cities have marijuana laws that would allow them to grow and that would allow them to consume without being worried about police intervention. Cities with relaxed marijuana laws have found not only more people moving in, but actually increasing home values and subsequently increased tax revenue because of having more population. If we do this before the state does and before Illinois does, that is what will give us as a city the biggest bang on being able to capitalize on more people moving here as a result of those laws. In some, Board Bill 180 is a board bill about how we choose to allocate our police resources. It's further moving the ball down the court toward legalization and taking another important step in getting us there. It will save the city money, it will start to end targeted policing and the war on drugs, and combat our heroin and opioid epidemic in the city. So I know I just threw a lot of information at you, but I'm happy to take some questions and I need there's my pen, and develop a list of any other resources or anything that the committee would find helpful in making a determination on this bill. Thank you.
So Alderman Kennedy, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could you talk a little bit about the relationship between the state statutes and the bill and its interaction?
Yes. So if you want to go to number 2, I guess, in your binder, which is the full legal analysis, and go to the 2 paragraphs that are toward the end of the page, where it talks about...
Page 1?
Yes, on page 1, sorry. It talks about how under the Missouri Constitution, we have the ability basically to determine how we use our police resources. That under the state constitution, local police departments are agents of local governments. And because we now have local control, that means that we have local the ability at a local level to determine our police resources. Federal and state laws regarding marijuana prohibition are still in effect, and that's true whether it's Colorado or California or whatever state passes legalization. They still don't trump federal laws. But what they do is redirect how their police resources are used in relation to these types of crime. Let's see, it's on the second page. And then if you go to page 2, again, toward the end of that page, it talks about preemption. So the ordinance is not preempted by state law. Preemption of a local law by a statute may be done explicitly or implicitly. And express preemption basically is if there's an express ban on something. We now have an express ban on raising the minimum wage in the city, for example. Implied preemption is through either having a conflict with state law or a field preemption. For the legal analysis that we have, nobody seems to think that that this ordinance is currently preempted, and if legislation to preempt it were to be passed, then it would trigger an unfunded mandate under the Hancock Amendment.
So the bill, as it says here, prohibits an officer from
Enforcing enforcing marijuana laws, so long as you meet the, there's a list of criteria. So the criteria are, as long as you are, the person who is consuming is 21 years of age or more, and is not providing marijuana to a person under the age of 21. As long as a person does not possess more than 2 ounces or more than 10 plants for personal use. As long as the person does not openly and publicly display or consume marijuana except on a private residential property. And as long as they're not consuming on, school property, city-owned, federal, state property. And so it has some limitations.
But there's no penalty if an officer does so.
No. So how it's written, and I think it's on, I need a copy of the board bill, actually.
The board bill?
Yeah.
Your board bill?
I left it over there, I think. The penalty is an employment penalty. It's under the Department of Personnel. So if you look at Section 6 on enforcement on page 6, so it says, and any employee of the City of St. Louis who expends the city's resources to enforce laws in violation of this ordinance will lack the lawful authority to do so and may be subjected to discipline under the laws and rules pertaining to the Department of Personnel unless said employee takes actions, such necessary actions to comply with a lawful court order. So what we're basically saying, and if you have other ideas on what the enforcement piece needs to look like, I'm definitely open to that.
Okay.
But basically, it would be up to the Department of Personnel to figure out what the repercussion is for violating this ordinance.
But this refers to any city employee.
Correct. So not just police.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Alderman Boyd.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's stay on that page in that section of the ordinance. So going to B, kind of explain that piece to me, because I kind of get lost when it talks about may be subject to eviction from city real estate.
So basically, it's saying if you're a city employee and you try to enforce these laws, that you could be removed from city property.
Okay. You mentioned about 800 plus marijuana municipal charges.
Yes, 842.
Are those convictions?
Yes.
Okay. Of those convictions, do you have any idea of how many is under the age of 21?
I do not. I can ask for that.
Okay. And since the current ordinance, 69429, what you're saying is police officers are still currently issuing citations even though we've asked them not to?
So we never asked them not to. What we asked them to do is, instead of leveling state charges, that it's a municipal violation.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, have you gotten an opinion from the circuit attorney's office?
No, I've been in communication with the circuit attorney's office throughout this. Her position has been that if a case comes to her, legally she needs to prosecute it under the law. If a case does not come to her, she does not need to prosecute it. And so by not enforcing these laws, we're ensuring that these cases never make it to her desk.
Okay. Out of curiosity, what is probably the most popular drug that's peddled on the streets?
Probably heroin.
Probably heroin. Okay, so marijuana is probably like a petty drug dealer's deal? Okay. You said something that was very striking, and I want to kind of follow up. You basically are suggesting that we don't have to follow any state law. We don't have to use any of our resources to follow any state laws. Is that correct?
our police resources, no.
Okay, so let me give you an example. So if someone's a convicted felon and they use a firearm to protect him, herself, or their family, that is in violation of state law. So I'm told by the police department that they have no choice but to make an arrest, which is insane. I would think that we can use discretion, but I'm told by the police that they have to make an arrest.
So police can use discretion every day, and we see them use discretion every day on who they pull over for speeding and who they don't, who they take it for jaywalking and who they don't. And so what we're asking with this bill is to use that discretion to say that we're not enforcing these laws.
Right. I mean, I just found it striking, and I can't wait to have law enforcement come and testify, because I have a real issue with the incident that just made no sense to me, but it kind of is in line with what you're trying to do, because sometimes common sense should prevail. Let's see, okay. I want to go back to the employment issue. So if I'm an employer and I want to drug test people that I'm interested in hiring, I must have a policy in place about drug testing.
You can drug test. There's nothing that says that you can't drug test. If it's not in your employee manual that you can be fired for testing positive, even if you're not doing it on company time, then the default position would be that that can't be the sole reason that you're fired. You can still do the drug test. You can still find that somebody tested positive for it. You just then can't use that as the sole reason to fire them unless they were visibly impaired on the job, or they were smoking on the job, or...
Okay, could I refuse to hire them?
Yes, you can refuse to hire someone.
Without having a written policy? Maybe I'm just a small shop, so a lot of times small business owners, they don't really have personnel
I will
manuals
check
and all
on that, but
kind
I
of stuff.
believe, and Heather might know better than I would actually, I think being an at-will state, I don't think that you could be compelled to hire somebody if they tested positive.
Okay, I would like to get clarity on that.
Okay.
But I'm going to draw your attention to page 6, the very first line. It says, it shall be an unlawful employment practice for an employer to refuse to hire any potential employee. That's the first sentence.
Oh, let me find it.
So that speaks a little different than
Okay.
what you're suggesting to me.
Let me double check on that. I don't think that that was the intent when we drafted it to be necessarily for hiring, more for people who are already employed. So if we have to clean up that language, I'm happy to do that.
Okay, and let's see, provide that the individual engaged in activity of premises. Can you just kind of actually, let's go back and sum up from on page 6, from line number 1 all the way to line number 7, because I'm getting confused when I get down to line 5, where it talks about or is reasonably and rationally related to the employment activities and responsibilities. It sounds like a lot of jargon that I'm
Say
not
that one more time.
comprehending. Line number 1, so
Page
6.
Page 6, okay.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding exactly what I'm reading once I get past line 3, where it says ordinance, activity that is subject to this ordinance. Then it says provided that the individual engaged in this activity off the blah, 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 blah. So explain to me what that kind of means, especially when it gets to reasonably and rationally related to employment activities.
To hire any potential to terminate the employment of... So reasonably and rationally, I believe, are employment law terms, and there are definitions for those. And I can double check on what those definitions are, but it refers to a specific kind of, I think, due process mechanism for being able to not hire, to fire someone.
Okay. All right, no further questions.
I will get you a definition.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Arnowitz.
What about me?
Oh, no, I'm going, wait, hang on, let me go down this one side. No, Kennedy, Boyd, Arnowitz, Hubbard, Howard. Going straight down the list. It goes straight down the list. Well, I'm going to go straight down the list since I screwed it up twice already. Since I've already messed this up twice already, I'm going to stay straight with the list. So it would be, Arnowitz would be next.
Okay. Just a couple questions. How many other cities has this same bill?
Not, so we'll say similar bills. So there are 5 cities that passed these laws in advance of their states passing these laws. There are now, I believe, 8 states and the District of Columbia that have passed laws that are similar to this.
But on the states, though, they're the ones that's generating revenue, though.
Correct.
This law here, you're basically looking to decriminalize, and we're not generating revenue. But also under this bill, it looks like, so right now we have in effect 28 grams, you can carry up 28 grams, and it's not a state charge, it's a city charge, which is an ounce. So you want to move it to 2 ounces, and just make that basically like we have in effect now.
Correct.
With the city.
So we want to make sure people aren't getting felonies on their records.
Okay.
And we want to keep some of these cases that are just over the current decrim ordinance from ending up in state court.
And I agree, and then under your bill, so if I have some marijuana in my house, I can invite my friends over and smoke it. But also at the same time, and we know how devious some people are, not everybody that wants to see something happen. But what keeps me from stockpiling marijuana and having them come over and smoke and then sell them 2 ounces at a time?
I mean, you would be in violation of this ordinance if you were doing that.
I'd have to get caught under that scenario.
You'd have to get caught right now under that scenario. So, I mean, that doesn't change.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I guess when they tell, police get complaints about drugs come out of house, they don't know what the drugs are.
Right.
But if this law would be in effect, I could actually become a seller, and hopefully I don't get caught. You know what I'm saying?
You could not become a seller under this
Sure I could.
ordinance.
I can go out
You
and
could
buy
not
2
legally,
ounces from
let's say,
right, not
you could not legally under this ordinance
Right.
become a seller.
That's what
So that
I'm
would
saying.
still be against the law.
So how do we enforce that to make sure it's legal, that everybody is not doing it illegally, which we can, I understand.
So what we need to have is some changes in state law.
Yeah.
So I think once medical passes, that's going to make it easier, and that regulatory framework
Right.
starts at the state level, that'll make it easier for us to come back and to deal with the sales piece.
And I really would like to see medical get approved like 3 years ago. And then under the law, you can only grow the plants if you have a basically enclosed fenced-in yard that can't be seen from the street.
It has to be inside and away from a window, so it can't be visible from
Like
the
a
street.
hothouse, yeah.
Yeah.
Grow lights
Okay. Have you spoke or gotten any feedback from like judges on this possible law?
Not from judges, no.
Um,
Although I will say one of the people that drafted this was Mike Wolf, who is a retired Missouri Supreme Court justice.
And he's good, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I'm just worried, if we move forward to this, just like we was told the state can't come in and overrule the minimum wage law, it would just be in the city and it happened.
Right.
So if we get something together, I guess that's my current fear, that right away this governor's going to call, well, we're going to override this like we did minimum wage, which I honestly don't think they should have been able to do that
Right.
on the minimum wage.
Well, and like I said earlier, the difference between that and this is that forcing us to enforce these laws to use our police resources in this way would very likely trigger the Hancock Amendment. It would be an unfunded mandate, and they would have to provide us money to be able to enforce those laws. And the state, quite frankly, is bankrupt, basically. I mean, we're cutting things left and right. And so I think if we're hedging our bets on whether the state would want to give more money to our police department to force us to enforce marijuana laws, I have a feeling that would be a pretty low priority for them. And I'll also say that this is a pretty bipartisan issue. Actually, a lot of the folks in Jefferson City, a lot of the elected officials that I've spoken with are Republicans, who seem to be a little bit more actually advanced on this issue than some Democrats. And so I think it's an issue that probably a lot of folks in the General Assembly would not have the appetite to go after us for the same way that they did with minimum wage.
And you're probably right. Okay, and I think by us maybe making some changes and moving forward without Russia can come up with a good bill. I mean, I always just thought maybe we need to do medical first, and then hopefully it falls in order with the rest.
Well, I think
I'd
this
like
all.
to see someday our state legalize it and, be a revenue generator like places like Colorado and I think Seattle and other places like that, so.
And I think that this is a step that we need to take to get us to that place. And if we take this step and then the state takes the step of medical, then it's going to allow us to take another step toward regulated legalization of sales in the city. But we have to have some other steps, and we have to start moving the ball down the court to get us to that place and get us there, in a timely manner. Because if, Illinois is ahead of us on this, Arkansas is now ahead of us on this, so we have some catching up to do.
I don't know, you gotta have a good paying job though to have 2 ounces of marijuana, you're talking $600.
But if you grow it yourself, it's the, the cost of a tomato plant, so it's pretty inexpensive to grow your own.
All right, save money.
Yes.
There you go. All right, no further questions, thanks.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Hubbard. Even though my list is wrong, we're going down it.
I don't think you can get a whole lot.
Howard?
But
Alderwoman Howard should be next.
she should, but going straight down the list, how the list is put here, it goes Hubbard next. So I'm just going to go straight down the list rather than risk missing somebody. And I actually
Howard, I
talked
can
to,
defer to you since you are next in seniority.
okay, then she's
Then I'll go
going.
next.
Alderwoman Howard, okay, we'll
I guess my concern is section, as was Alderman Boyd's concern, is the section on, section 5, starting on page 5, going over to page 6. I wonder whether we would be prudent to dictate to employers their ability to enforce their requirements for employment. I would feel more comfortable because, when we're talking about employers and the responsibility of employees and trying to sort this out, I think is sort of going beyond the reach of what we're trying to do here. If a condition of employment is to be drug-free, I kind of shudder to ask that, if somebody's driving my child to school on a school bus while they're high, if there wouldn't be ramifications for that. And this language in here to me kind of says the employer can't do anything. And I don't know whether we want to go off into that tangent. I think decriminalizing the marijuana is fine, but I think people still need to be held accountable if they're taking any substance while they're employed and with any amount of responsibility. And I think maybe just leave that alone.
Okay.
My thought.
And I said previously, I'm happy, if it's going to make it easier for this bill to get passed, if we just strike that section, and that's a conversation we have another day, I'm okay doing that, because I do think that, in a way, it does make this bill more complicated than it needs to be.
Yeah. If we're just trying to decriminalize marijuana, which I'm in favor of, somebody, having a joint or 2 or growing a plant or 3, shouldn't be reason to take them to court and muck up their lives. But if somebody has a certain amount of responsibility in their job, I think that if they're dabbling in any kind of drugs or anything to impair their ability, it should be the right of the employer to make them held
Right.
accountable
Okay.
for that.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to go back. Alderwoman Hubbard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a few questions. The first being, what's the urgency? Because you spoke about how you've spoken to members of the Missouri legislature, Republicans, who, if we pass this, wouldn't be likely to come back to have us change it or whatever. What's the urgency, and why wouldn't you wait on the state to take a holistic approach in decriminalizing marijuana and putting us in the position to be able to tax it? I want to know why you have chosen to jump out there ahead of the state.
Because we had 256 deaths from heroin and opioids in this city last year. We had more deaths from overdoses than we had deaths from homicide. And we're bearing the brunt of the state, and that data is in the back section of your binder here. We're bearing the brunt of that for the entire state. The other thing is, I don't anticipate, and I think once we get some policy experts up here to talk about it, I don't think any of us anticipate legalization passing through the Missouri General Assembly. If it passes, it's going to be, I think, again, a ballot initiative the way that new approach is right now. And so we have medical that is going to be on the ballot, hopefully, in November. And this helps to put us in a position so when that passes, we can then take another step toward full legalization and not necessarily have to wait on the state for that, and be able to look at taxing mechanisms and business license fees and all of that stuff at that time. So it's positioning us to get ahead of the state so that we can hopefully get ahead of the revenue generation for the state. Because if we do it before the rest of the state, then people will come here for it. If we wait on the rest of the state, I mean, people are going to Illinois right now. And I think that we can expect to see that, we'll lose that money to Illinois.
Okay, and I see that you've made several correlations, one being a point you just made again about if we decriminalize it somewhat, people will be more likely to come here. I mean, well, I don't see a lot of people in our city rushing and moving to Denver or rushing and moving to LA, so I don't know if that's really truthful. And then you also,
if you look at number 11.
And I know that you are very data driven, but when I just look at things, from within my community, and when I see what people are actually doing, we have other issues in this city that will prevent people from coming here, crime being one of them. So I don't believe that, okay, if we hurry up and do something about marijuana, we'll get this influx of people coming. And also you spoke about if we hurry up and do something in regards to marijuana, then it will help out our opioid problem. Well, I don't know how true that is. I mean, people in my community, they're using marijuana, they're using opium, heroin, they're using everything. So I can't say if we legalize marijuana that'll stop people from actually using heroin, because with real loose marijuana laws, I've seen people in my community actually graduate. There are different strands of marijuana that are out there now than there were when I was younger. So I've seen people, actually take that step. So, I mean, I'm for legalizing marijuana. I'm for decriminalizing, but I feel like, we should be doing it in a proper way and not just rush out there to do something that may feel good to people without us having thought it all the way through. And so, like I said, I'm in a position that I want a bill before me. I want us to be working in conjunction with the state, so it's something that we all can make a good decision about. But just to jump out there and then you're getting 1,000 calls about people, legalize, and then we haven't put all the proper things in place. I mean, you just stood there now saying that we probably need to take a certain section out of the bill because it kind of muddy things up a little bit about employment and stuff like that. I just think we need to think it through. I don't think we need to have such a great sense of urgency to do it. And that's all my comment is for now. But like I said, I want it to be something that we can pass through. But let's pass the right thing. Let's inform our constituents about what they can do. Because you have some people walking around thinking, you know, this says just 2 ounces or less. You have people in my community thinking, oh, I could have 20 pounds now. And I mean, that's the misinformation that's out there regarding this bill. So I think we just need to do the right thing and make the right choice. And that's all the comment I have for right
And
now.
when we get to public testimony, I'll make sure that I get some of those folks from the state level to come and testify to hopefully alleviate some of your concerns and talk about the state climate.
Thank you. Okay, so Alderwoman Murphy.
I really don't have any questions at this time, just a comment. I wanted to thank you and your cohorts for all this information. I appreciate the thorough study and all the information, and I'll hold questions so I do my homework.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chairman Ogilvy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things in your introduction about how many charges there actually are. I guess the first thing I'll say is I don't care if people smoke weed. I feel like we're up here, we're going to be judged on, you know, like we're moralizing on whether people should smoke weed or not. I don't care. The only thing I care about is whether we can legally enact this bill or not and face repercussions from the state or not, and maybe not repercussions directly related to this bill, but, you know, it's nothing is more in vogue at the state level right now than enacting policies that hurt St. Louis. So first question is I guess in my mind, in my experience in St. Louis, anybody who wants to smoke weed is smoking weed right now. It's not like we're in some prohibition era where like it's not available. People smoke weed in public. They smoke weed in their cars. It's hardly, you know, like an underground drug that people don't have access to. And I don't see. So what this bill would legalize, I'm going to ask a couple of questions about it, but it basically legalizes use in your home. Mm-hmm. I don't know of any cases where people are issued standalone charges for smoking weed in their house. So I guess the question is, we have a de facto situation where this bill is already enacted because the police don't knock on your door and write you a ticket for smoking weed while you watch a movie.
If it's not visible, though, if you have it in your pockets when you're out, you would also not get a citation or something under this. Because the way that it's written is you have to be displaying it, selling it, transferring it in order for it to be in effect. And so it removes some of the, you know, if you're being searched, it removes some of that probable cause among police to do searches that we know disproportionately affect certain folks in our community under the assumption that they have something on them.
Okay, so we know that since 2013, when we enacted the local, we're just going to write you a citation rather than prosecute you ordinance, the testimony at that time in 2013 was that we had not been, the circuit attorney's office had not been pursuing any standalone marijuana possession or use charges. So the argument that we're like sending people to jail in St. Louis for smoking marijuana or carrying around marijuana, I mean, we hadn't been, zero. They'd issued 0 cases for like 3 years under that.
So defense attorneys will tell you that that's not true.
So the circuit attorney was lying?
They, like I said earlier, they don't track it based upon the type of drugs that people are being prosecuted for. And so I was unable to give you the data today on the number of state charges for marijuana versus other drugs, but I do know from defense attorneys that I've spoken with and working in this bill that people are being prosecuted for marijuana and only marijuana.
It would, well, whether that is true or not, and I guess I don't know 100%, it would be, I would like the circuit attorney to talk about that one way or the other. I'd like her on record saying, we are doing this or we're not doing this. I think that would be valuable for everybody. And I also, I'm not sure I believe that they can't figure out what drug they're prosecuting people for if they are. I think if they, can I make this request formally of the chair?
Absolutely.
I want the circuit attorney or representative from the circuit attorney's office to come here and explain whether they are charging people with standalone and prosecuting people for misdemeanor or felony standalone marijuana violations, one, and two, if they say they cannot come up with the data to they don't know, I want them to explain exactly why they don't know that, because I don't believe that they cannot come up with that information. Yeah.
I agree, and we're going to have, actually, I'm going to try to get as much, maybe even from some of the judges, from the prosecutor. I'd like to get actually a whole lot more input on this.
Okay. So if we can make that request to the circuit attorney's office via letter, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Well, I would ask the vice chairman to send.
You want the vice chair to just write that up? Perfect.
And send it over.
So we know since 2013, we have been writing tickets. We've been writing a couple hundred tickets a year, I guess, which I guess was the point of the 2013 ordinance, to offer an option. I don't know. I mean, I assume people are paying those tickets. I don't know. They're $100.
Plus court costs, so
Yeah.
they're like $175. If you don't pay it on time, you get late fees.
Right. Okay. So, just so I understand, basic questions about what would or would not be permitted. So, growing marijuana permitted in your house.
Away from windows or visible from the street.
Using marijuana in your house permitted, obviously. Using or growing marijuana in an apartment that you're renting from somebody else.
As long as it's allowed, in that you have permission from the property owner.
So the landlord can prohibit that in a lease, say you
Yeah.
can't grow or you, I mean, I think that's in a lot of leases.
Yes, it is
It's
now.
like, yeah. Transporting marijuana in a car, permitted? Not up to 2 ounces.
Let me look. That I'm not sure, actually. I think if it's on you and it's not visible, that is permitted.
Okay.
You're not displaying it, transferring it. There's the list. Displaying, transferring, distributing, selling it in your car, as long as it's not visible, you're not under the influence, which is in the original decrim ordinance.
Right.
You're okay.
Using, so I'm a little unclear on how public place is defined, which is, that's on page 4. I can use marijuana at my house. Can I use marijuana at a restaurant if the restaurant says it's okay? So yes.
Yes.
So you, okay. So what if a restaurant says it's not okay? Then I can't.
And you can't.
Okay. But if a bar says you can smoke weed here, then that's fine. Is that not prohibited by our no smoking ordinance?
I think it's yet to, I think that's something we have to figure out. We went back and forth on whether it was or was not. And we think I think where we landed was as long as there was express consent from the property owner that it was allowed. But I think we can also, if that becomes an issue, we can also put in here that they have to adhere to all of the smoke-free ordinance, and there can't be a exception.
Okay, because that's an interesting contradiction, that tobacco smoke is prohibited, marijuana smoke permitted at a restaurant or a bar. My instinct tells me that more people would find it objectionable working in an environment that has a lot of marijuana smoke than a lot of tobacco smoke, but I guess I would comment, I mean, I think the intent of the ordinance is personal use. I would say 10 plants is probably exceeding what is personal use for most people. That's like
No,
a
you will.
couple pounds a year if you're
No, it's
doing
not.
it right, which,
We will have some marijuana experts testify as to why 10 is a appropriate number.
okay.
Because there's different stages of the growth cycle. If you want to have something at all times, you
If
have
you're
to.
doing it right, 10 plants can produce a lot of marijuana. I can give people marijuana, but I can't sell it to them.
I do not believe that you can give it. That would be considered transferring.
Okay.
So transferring from one person to the other.
So I can only grow marijuana for my own personal use. I can't sell it.
Correct.
I can't, okay.
I will say Washington DC's ordinance allows for gifting. And it's created this kind of gray area about what constitutes gifting and what doesn't. And while it was something that we looked at, I think we opted to, wait and see how DC kind of figures their way through that gray area before we went down that same route.
If I have a house that's 100 feet from a school, I can't do any of this.
Under this, correct.
Right.
And I think, and that's been pointed out to me, that that's probably an exemption that we want to make if it's private, if you are on private property that you own.
Okay. So, and then I think, to me, the most interesting part is then what I'm going to call the, what I'm going to call the preemption part. So, I understand that this ordinance isn't saying like some section of Missouri's statutes just don't apply. They're saying we're prohibiting our employees from enforcing those. So it's interesting because in this legal analysis, then, the theory, so maybe we think we don't want to enforce marijuana laws and we all sort of have consensus on that. That theory applies to like any criminal section of the state code, though. I mean, there's no difference in the state code between, I mean, there's differences in what the punishment are for the amounts, but there's no difference, like, functionally between marijuana and heroin, between marijuana and fentanyl, between marijuana and, like, quote-unquote bath salts, between marijuana and cocaine, between marijuana and methamphetamine, between all that stuff, or all of the other criminal stuff, offenses against people, et cetera. So is it your opinion, or is it the opinion of these three attorneys that any municipality can say, we don't enforce any section of state criminal code?
That's a question I would have to ask them. Our conversations have been specifically about marijuana law and not bigger than that. I will say on the drug piece, though, when you look at some other cities, you look at like Gloucester, Massachusetts, started the Angel program, where basically they're saying they won't enforce any drug laws for anybody who wants to come and turn in their drugs into a police station or a firehouse, and they can get treatment, they can get help without any kind of prosecution. And so I think we're starting to see, I think there's 80 cities that have done that now. We're starting to see more cities decide that they're not going to enforce certain aspects of drug laws to try to take more of a public health approach to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously, prosecutors have wide discretion in what they prosecute or don't prosecute. And I think a prosecutor could legally make an argument and say, I just don't prosecute these cases. But, I would say, so to my knowledge, there is no other ordinance in any municipality in Missouri that's like this, that just says we prohibit our own employees from enforcing part of the state criminal code. So the idea is, if Shrewsbury thinks, oh, we don't prosecute people for methamphetamine, they can do that. If Wildwood says, we don't prosecute people for fourth-degree assault, then that's legal. If Wellston says, we don't prosecute people for illegal guns, that's legal. If Jefferson City says, we don't prosecute Johns for prostitution because we don't think that's a worthwhile endeavor, then
And actually, a lot of cities are starting to do that now, too.
right. But I'm just saying it opens the door to this idea that any municipality can just pick and choose the state laws it wants to enforce or not, because there's no difference in state law between marijuana and all this other stuff within the criminal code. I don't buy that. I don't buy this legal analysis that it's like a Hancock Amendment to say, I don't think the state has to say you have to enforce these laws, but I think the state can say you can't prohibit your law enforcement from enforcing them, which goes to the penalty section, which is interesting. So in addition to the above penalties, any official employee or elected official of the city who expends resources to enforce laws in violation of this ordinance may be subject to eviction from city real estate. So it's your opinion that if Kim Gardner's office prosecutes a felony marijuana case for possession or for growing in somebody's house, we can evict Kim Gardner from her office across the street?
I don't think that's what the intent was.
Well, that's what I don't know what the intent is, but that's what the words say we can do. How would we evict Kim Gardner from her office?
That I don't know.
How would we evict a police officer from the police station who, writes up a charge and gives it to the prosecutor? I don't.
What do you think would be an appropriate response for somebody enforcing something that is against city ordinance? Just a personnel violation?
Well, I think my personal opinion is that the legal way to do this is to is for the prosecutor to have a policy that they don't issue these charges, except maybe in extreme cases or something, and for the police department to have a policy that they handle these things in a certain way. I think in the real world that can work and probably prevents us from running afoul of what I think is state law. And we can do that without raising the hackles of Josh Hawley, who can come make a name for himself by sticking it to St. Louis again. That's my opinion. I think like, legalize it at the state level. I think we're going to get there anyway in the next year. And I think this,
Not in a year.
I think it'll be on the ballot in November.
No, the legal marijuana initiative will not make it on the ballot.
Well, medical will be on the ballot at least.
It will, but medical doesn't go far enough.
I mean, medical goes farther than this goes in some cases, because medical marijuana, you have some level of protection to carry it around with you, and a guarantee that you won't be prosecuted by the Missouri Highway Patrol or something. And you have the ability to source it from some type of legitimized supplier rather than having to grow it yourself, which is what this
I mean, a
says.
lot of the cities that have dispensaries set up also allow for home grow. And so
Right.
the home grow piece really isn't something that is outside the norm.
I'm just saying, if you are a person who has a need for medical marijuana, many of those people are going to prefer to get it from a dispensary rather than growing their own, so that's why I'm saying legalized medical marijuana at the state level provides a lot of certainty that like this does not provide. So it's not, I would dither with the idea that it's not important to do at the state level or it's not valid. I guess that gets to the other concern, is that if we enacted this and we sort of say local police aren't going to handle a lot of this stuff, there's still state highway patrol. I mean, we can still be setting up people for failure to some extent, because the highway patrol can still pull them over on the highway, can still search their car, can still arrest and prosecute them for marijuana possession that would not be illegal under this local law, and we can't do anything about that. So it does create a confusing situation, I think, for many residents.
I think we have to look at the chances of that happening, and I think most would argue that that's a pretty low chance, especially without cooperation from St. Louis Police Department. I mean, the highway patrol, yeah, they're doing tickets right now on the highways for people who are speeding. They have not, since they've come into St. Louis, they're not out there preventing violent crime. They're out there just doing a revenue generation scheme, basically, for the state. And I think that if we always wait on the state to do something, then we're never the leader and the powerhouse that we really need to be as a city. Because most progressive policy starts at the local level.
Right. And I guess I would say a policy can be a policy without it being an ordinance. So,
I think we ignore a lot of our policies right now in the city, and policy can be changed with a stroke of a pen, and an ordinance would actually take a public process of coming back before this body in order to change something, in a deliberative public process, which I think is important.
maybe. I think we ignore a lot of ordinances too, so. All right, I mean, I guess to summarize, I think some parts have to come out. I mean, I think this eviction from city real estate sentence is like kind of absurd. The Board of Alderman doesn't have the ability to evict elected officials or police officers from any place. So that has to come out. I think the employment part has to come out because it's clearly contradicted 100% by state law. State law covers that entire area with a lot of detail, and we can't preempt state law in that area. And then, I don't know, I have to think about the rest, but thank you.
Thank you. Alderwoman Navarro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Alderwoman. I support what you are trying to do here, and I do have a couple of questions. And I share some of the concerns of my colleagues, especially regarding the employment section, and you and I have talked about that. And I didn't see in the legal opinion anything referencing specifically the employment piece of it. So if that's there, just let me know. But I think, like others have said, there is a large body of law about employment discrimination, and even the effect of employee manuals. There's a lot of case law about the role of employment manuals and employment discrimination. And we have very specific groups of people that we've said are protected from employment discrimination, based on race, gender, disability. And so I think this treads into dangerous territory when we start carving out pieces. The other thing is, my understanding is we don't have the ability to create a cause of action. So if this were passed, it's not as if someone could go file a claim in state court. Correct. And so for all of those reasons, like we've discussed, I have real issues with that section of it. But the other piece, the language that I'm looking at, and this may be a matter of cleaning it up, or I'm curious what your intent is, on page 5, section D, regarding displaying, possessing, or consuming marijuana in your school grounds. So the way I read that is, if someone is consuming marijuana with the intent to consume it, they can do that within 1,000 feet. But if they're consuming it with the intent of selling it or growing it, which I'm not sure how you consume marijuana with the intent to grow it, but I think that language there, I'm having a hard time understanding like how that would actually play out. So I don't know if you wanted to speak to what your intent with that section is. That would be helpful.
I mean, basically the intent was to make sure people aren't smoking it on school property or on, around, public property and stuff like that, and to make sure that they're also not selling it, transferring it to somebody else, they're not distributing it, they're not setting up growing, in a shed on school property or something like that, to try to create some of the same mechanisms that we have to, with smoking ordinances and things like that, to keep it away from schools.
Okay, yeah, then I think maybe we just need to, or maybe I need to look at it more closely. It's just that the display, possess, consume, display, transfer didn't follow consistently there for me.
If we need to clean that up to get it so that that is what it is interpreted as, I'm happy to work with you on what that needs to look like.
Great, yeah, thank you. That's all the questions I have.
President Reed.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I have a number of issues with the bill, and I guess the biggest issue is what the bill is attempting to do. First and foremost, a lot of the data that you listed in your report and the things that you talked about today, I agree with, and I think that under, legalization of marijuana, we would see those changes, and those changes would all be positive for the city of St. Louis. They would impact our crime rate in a positive manner. I think we would see, fewer people dying of opioid overdose and all this other stuff that we're seeing. I think that all those things would be enhanced under legalization, right? But what the key difference here is in cities like Denver, Colorado, and also heard you in your testimony. You said Denver is doing a very similar thing to what we're doing, except, in terms of policing, right?
I don't think I referenced Denver.
Well, you referenced when we're talking about policing, you referenced Denver doing the same thing with the state as what we would be doing. And it's different in Denver because the state is legalized all across the state. And in the city of St. Louis, it would not be legal.
Did legalize ahead of the state.
I know, but what I'm saying is Denver right now it's legal, and we're seeing what's happening in Denver in terms of additional revenue and everything else, and the crime rate and everything that it's enhanced, due to the fact that the entire state is legal, right, in Denver. But here's the biggest challenge. If you look at what this bill does, it essentially says, okay, for the illegal drug market that's happening in the city of St. Louis, we're going to turn a blind eye to that illegal drug market and let that illegal drug market prosper. That's if we're not going to police it. That's what it's saying. And I find the problem with that because the neighborhoods that would be hardest impacted by that are the neighborhoods that are seeing, very high rates of crime and murder and things of that nature in our city. And that's problematic. What we need to do is work on a replacement, just like other cities have done, create a legal alternative to the illegal marketplace. Because if we're not working to create a legal alternative to this illegal marketplace, but then we say we're no longer going to police that illegal marketplace, what happens in that illegal marketplace are all the millions of dollars that would be normally funneled through this legal process now will be funneled through that illegal process. And I don't see how we reduce crime rate that way. I don't see that.
To that?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so a
please.
couple of things. The illegal drug trade is still illegal under this ordinance because we are still.
But hold on for a second.
May I please finish?
I have the floor.
Okay.
I have the floor.
I'm trying to just respond
I know,
to.
but I want you threw a point out there. I want to make sure that it's addressed. You said the legal process is still illegal, right? But we can't police it.
Yes, we can. So if you are displaying it, if you are displaying it, if you are transferring it, if you are selling
said
it on
openly.
these properties, if you are, let me find the whole list. If you are doing any of those, here we go. If you are displaying it, transferring it, distributing it, selling it, cultivating it in open air, that is still illegal. So police can still go after you for that.
All right. How many places in this bill do you talk about selling them?
We probably mention it a half dozen to a dozen times.
No, you mentioned it twice. You mentioned it twice in this bill. Now, and here's the challenge that you have in mentioning the way in those sections. Let's go to the sections you were just going through. The challenge that you have with the way you've set this bill up, if you go to page 5, and we'll go to line item 10, and line item 12, where you talk about, where sell comes up, and it says any individual who displays, transfers, distributes, sells, or grows marijuana on land or in buildings owned and operated by state and federal government, right? And then F, any individual who displays, transfers, distributes, sells, or cultivates marijuana on land or in buildings where the owner of the land or building has prohibited marijuana on the premises, provided that the owner posts a notice that openly and conspicuously informs the person regarding the private prohibition. So under your bill, first and foremost, landowners or landlords would have to post out. So once the bill is passed, or if the bill was adopted, every landowner, if they did not want this to happen on their land, they would have to post out, opposed to the opposite, right? And that's problematic. And then the other thing is, when I was alderman of the 6th Ward, when I first became alderman at Lafayette, Park and Compton, in that neighborhood, there was our most active drug sales across the entire ward came from that neighborhood. And you want to guess what which property it came out of? No. A grandmother who had guardianship over the kids, and the kids sold it out of her front yard, right? Now, the way they sold it out of the front yard, it wasn't open, and it wasn't like they were saying, here, pot for sale. They didn't have a sign that said that, but they ran a lot of drugs to that house, right? So in this type of bill, you open up open up that illegal marketplace even more. And it's neighborhoods and communities that will be, but neighborhoods and communities that are currently ravaged by this stuff, and some of the seniors that are scared to come out of their home, to even leave their house to catch the bus or whatever, we run the risk of further expanding that marketplace when we say we're just going to turn a blind eye and not police.
So if I'm allowed to speak to that now.
Please, please.
Like I said before, this is about personal use, and so it's about what you can do in your own home versus what you can do on the street.
That's what you're,
And so the
hold on a second, Alderman, I understand, but it's not about what you say. It's not, this isn't about what you say and what your intent is. What is going to happen is once this becomes law, if it's not in here and in writing, it doesn't matter about how you see it in a nuanced fashion. It's how it can be practically implemented. And therein lies the problem, is it is not your intent. If your intent isn't codified in writing here, it does not matter.
So would you be willing to provide me with the language that you think would need to be in that section in order to ensure that what you are saying does not happen? The language that we worked on here, we do not think that that is what it allows, but if that is your interpretation of it, I would really like to see what language needs to be in there to make it so that that is not the case.
It's not just my personal interpretation. It's from other legal professionals who took a look at this document. Also, I know that you stated in your testimony that Judge Wolf authored this document. Judge Wolf is a friend of mine, right? And I called him to talk to him specifically about this ordinance. And what he informed me was that he had notified you and whoever else was working with you over and over again that, number one, you had the right under state law to decide how you use your policing resources. And he said that's what his legal opinion addressed. But he also said that, when you take a look at this employment sections and other places where you are attempting to kind of open that market up to preempt the state, he notified you guys that you could not preempt the state, and you were not on sound footing. So I would just caution you not to kind of throw his name out there like he's backing this whole document, and this document was penned by him.
So what I have said is he helped provide legal advice on this. He provided,
that's not what he's testified.
He provided comments on it, he provided revisions on it, and wrote a legal analysis based upon the final draft that we submitted. And he did have concerns about the employment piece.
And I'm glad you finally came clean on that, but what I'm going to invite you to do is go watch the video.
Calling me a liar again.
That's true. It's true.
Because I'm a woman, right?
No, stop that. Stop that.
I mean,
stop that. Because I'm an African man, if I'm an African American man, right? Is that what this is all about?
It's getting a little like
Alderwoman, you made a statement earlier. Now, if you don't stand by that statement, just say I don't stand by that statement. But don't throw the woman thing up against me, because I'm not throwing the African-American man thing up against you.
Let's keep all.
Are you having a problem with me because I'm an African-American man?
But
all right, well then stop that.
It's becoming pretty routine here to insinuate that I am a liar.
Well, you did lie about that.
When what I am trying to say is clarify statements and actions, and if something that I said was not interpreted in the way that it was intended to be, then I apologize for that.
Okay.
And so I feel like I have cleared up.
Let's move on beyond this.
Well, anyway, so then the next section that I have a problem with is section number 4, police conduct. Because you allude to the fact that we have all these people being arrested and charged with drug crimes, and the police are unfairly, going after African Americans, right? So, but because of Section 4, the way you have Section 4 in there, it still allows the police to do exactly what you're saying this bill would not allow the police to do, because this ordinance shall not prohibit police officers from conducting searches.
Unless they're in violation.
You won't know if they reasonable, no, that's not what, again, I'm going to invite you to read the section that you wrote here. It says, the reasonable suspicion. So if you're African-American and you're wearing a hoodie and saggy pants, the police officers can say, I had reasonable suspicion.
Reasonable suspicion that you have more than 2 ounces. If somebody's walking around with 2 ounces, you're going to be able to see that.
Not really.
That's a lot of...
Not really, not if you wear a baggy sweatshirt and stuff. And then he says, well, because of that baggy sweatshirt, I thought you had more than 2 ounces. But you didn't. So again, you're not, as an African-American male and raising 4 African-American kids, 2 African-American sons, that I worry about them every time they go out, and their interaction with government, their action with police, and so on and so forth. I just want to be clear that this bill does not do anything to eliminate that inherent bias. It just does not. I would, don't try to sell it under that umbrella, because that's not factual. And then you said 800 and some odd, people were, received citations for marijuana since the bill we passed in 2013. How many people are currently in prison in the city of St. Louis for marijuana?
That I don't know.
Would you be surprised if I told you out of the 1,500 people currently locked up in the city, only 5 of them are locked up purely because of marijuana?
It's felony possession, I could believe that.
5 out of 1,500. And then the other thing that you talked about earlier, you said, well, if people can grow a marijuana plant for the cost of a tomato plant, it essentially removes the marketplace. That would have to assume that, and it's a statement, that would have to assume that everyone who travels to and around our city are under the same law and have marijuana plants growing in their homes, so they have no more need for that illegal marketplace. That would have to assume that St. Louis County has the same law in place, and everybody that wants to smoke or consume marijuana in St. Louis County now will no longer have to come to the city of St. Louis and buy their drugs, and that is not true. That would have to assume that everybody in the city of St. Louis who wants to consume marijuana would automatically take to growing their own plants. So the connection between growing plants and the multi-million-dollar marketplace of drug sales in the city of St. Louis just doesn't exist in my mind, because when you look at that, there's, 350,000 people in the city of St. Louis somewhere. Actually, a little bit less than that now. We're hoping it's 350,000 by the next census. How many people in St. Louis County?
3 million.
A million, right? And then you go to St. Charles and beyond. So there's 3 times as many people in St. Louis County as there is in St. Louis City. In St. Louis County, you won't be able to grow 10 plants. Let's just assume for a second that the ability to grow 10 plants knocks out the marketplace. The largest portion of the marketplace today is St. Louis County coming into the city to buy. The largest marketplace, the largest customer base, if indeed this passed, would still be St. Louis County coming into the city.
I would like to see your data behind that.
I'll show you the data behind it. I'll be happy to show you the data behind it. And I also will show you the data that growing, the ability to grow 10 plants will not knock out the illegal marketplace in the city.
Will it kill
Here's
it?
the thing. But I understand why you believe that. You probably believe it because that's taking it from a consumer standpoint, right? The gangs, the drug dealers and stuff, it's not about consumption, it's about economics and it's about a business, right? So for them, it's the sale of it, it's not the consumption of it, but from a consumer standpoint, you say, well, it eliminates the marketplace. No, it does not. The largest portion of the marketplace isn't the handful of people in the city of St. Louis that would take to grow on 10 plants. It's far beyond that. I mean, you have to think way, way beyond just that minute piece, right? And the fact that under this bill, you end up setting a more unfair playing field for people who are right now being pulled over for no cause, people right now who are being harassed for no cause, but you're not addressing the issue of what happens in court because those folks will still find themselves wrapped up in court. And I just think this bill has numerous problems all the way through it, including the employment section we heard about earlier. And then here's another. So if there's a drug house in your neighborhood, what can you do about it?
You can call on the drug house.
No, you cannot. No, you cannot.
Does not impact nuisance laws.
Yes, it does.
As long as you are growing your 10 plants for personal use and you are possessing less or 2 ounces or less for personal use, you still cannot sell, you cannot transfer, you cannot give it to somebody. There's still the ability to go after those drug houses.
All right. Let's get in that for a minute. So in this bill, it clearly states that not just the police department, but no city resource can be used. No city resource can be used. That's every city department from the health department on through, right? So if we had a drug house, and I've had to deal with this multiple times through. I don't know if you've had to deal with it as much as I've had to deal with it, another alderman had to deal with it. But it is an iterative process to begin to get that drug house shut down and out of your neighborhood, right? So if you're saying to the police and everyone, well, all those folks that are filing in and out of their house every day, the property owner is okay with the consumption of the product on their property, right? And you have no idea what they're selling them inside of the house, right? So you don't even have any control to begin to address the issues of this illegal drug house within your neighborhood. And the thing is, by creating this, by setting the groundwork to allow the expansion of the illegal marketplace over creating a legal alternative to marijuana sales, which would help us with all this data that you have in the book, right? This legal process. By opening up this illegal marketplace, you impact not just the neighborhoods, you impact the dropout rates, you impact the crime rates within these neighborhoods, you impact our ability to address some of the nuisance laws, and a host of other, and that's just off the top of my head in this last couple seconds. And I just think the whole bill is problematic because what you're attempting to do is to try to find a way to preempt state law by creating this illegal marketplace, by telling the police they can no longer police, and I just think all of that is problematic.
Thank you, Mr. President. You are certainly welcome to your opinion.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now, hang on. Alderwoman Davis, she had a quick comment. and then we're going to try to wrap this up, because
Thank you.
this is,
I need some
and-
water.
I'm sorry, and Alderman Boyd would like to do a follow-up. So Alderwoman Davis, if you're going to keep it quick, please, and then we're going to do a
Okay.
follow-up here.
Alderwoman Green, I took a moment to analyze the bill, and my main concern is that we continue to try to get ourselves in trouble for no good reason when we don't have standing. So the main problem that I'm concerned about is the state is going to present some serious challenges to us, and we're creating a missed opportunity for us to really go towards legalizing and getting the state's assistance with that. I am all for legalizing marijuana. I think people should have the ability to smoke it anytime they want to. But we don't have the legal standing to put that in place. We have done the best that we could do without a challenge from the state or federal government, and making sure that we decriminalize it as much as possible. And it's working. It's really working. I mean, people smoke their marijuana wherever they want to. No police officers getting ready to stop you because you're smoking. They don't care. And they know that the best that they can do is to give you the summons. It's like a parking ticket, okay? So I wanted to ask you, could you somehow find your way to work with a coalition of moving this forward and work with the state? Because the state is having serious conversations right now. I don't think we need to be trying to pass any more laws right now. Not this particular law, because now what you're doing is putting people in jeopardy. How many people are going to take time to read? This is a lot here to figure out, am I against the law? Am I okay? You know, it's just too much. It's too much when you simplify processes that benefit citizens. That's a good thing. But when you complicate it, that's a bad thing. And so I would ask and recommend that this bill is put aside and work towards the goal of protecting citizens and working with the state.
So I'm willing to work with the state. I'm not willing to put this bill aside. And when we have public testimony, I look forward to having some folks who have been working on state issues, as well as some pretty reputable attorneys come before us and testify why we do have standing to do this, and why actually this move is not all that different from what a lot of cities are doing across the country in terms of how we choose to use our police resources to deprioritize and not enforce certain marijuana laws.
Well, that's all I need to hear.
Thank you, and then Alderman Boyd had a follow-up.
Real quick, I forgot to ask you, on page 5, where it talks about any individual who displays, transfers, distributes, sells, or cultivates marijuana on land or in buildings where the owner of the land or buildings has prohibited marijuana. I'm sorry, I'm starting on page 12. I mean, line 12 on page 5.
Okay, yes.
And it goes on to say, or prohibited marijuana on the premises, provided that the owner post a notice that openly and conspicuously informs the person regarding the private prohibition. So, as a landlord, for example, having rental property, if I rent to someone, I need to post outside my premises that any marijuana use is strictly prohibited. Is that what this says to me?
Or in your lease.
Huh?
Or in your
Okay,
lease.
so-
And I think that we can, clarify that to say a
Okay,
lease
yeah, I think
agreement
that would need to be
is,
cleared up, because I wouldn't want to have those posted on my buildings.
yeah, that's fine.
And this may be kind of a cute comment, but I'm just thinking, I own this event space, and if I was into smoking, which I'm not, I could probably advertise weed parties and charge people like $20 to get in.
You could probably,
I mean,
do
could
pretty well
could
with
we
that.
go down that route? I mean, legally, we could, have 100 people in and charge $20 and call it, advertise a weed party?
don't know that you would want to advertise it as a weed party. I think you would want to consult an attorney before you do that.
No,
But
I
if
wanna
it's-
make that sure
but if
that's
it's-
clear in
If
this
it's private
ordinance.
property and it's personal use, and you have the permission of the landlord to use, and you have less than the amount that you're, allowed to have for personal consumption, I don't see necessarily why a group of people couldn't get together. But when you start adding money into it is when it starts to complicate things under state
Well,
law.
but the money, I wouldn't be transferring, I'm just the owner. I don't even want to indulge in smoking it, but I may want to rent it out and advertise a weed party and just charge $20 to get in to have fun and sell alcohol, by the way, and anything else that I can make money off of, except the weed. So would I be covered in this?
Let me get an opinion for you on your weed party. I'm
Okay.
happy to do that.
Not to say I want to. I'm just playing this out.
I'm going to hold you to that.
Because it's not going to happen. But somebody might want to do that. That's all I have.
Anyway, so I would say it seems like it's got quite a bit of work. I would ask you just work with everybody. When you're ready to bring it back,
Okay.
we'll bring it back. At the next meeting, you could see why, after 2.5 hours, if we had public testimony, this would be going on until midnight. The next meeting, we'll probably ask the aldermen and women to hold their comments to you and actually have them talk to any of the experts that you would choose to bring in. After that, then, according to our Rule 27, then anybody that wishes to speak pro or con will get 5 minutes. That's under our rules.
Yep. May I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Or I guess procedurally. I think that there's a few things in here that we know for sure are going to change based upon not just, from the committee today.
Committee substitute.
Do the committee sub and then have public testimony on that committee sub.
Yeah, we'll just put it in front of us and do.
Okay.
Because I think, hopefully by then you've had a chance to talk to everybody, work out some of the issues. Ultimately, at the end of it, then it comes back to the board of, or this committee to make that decision. So,
Okay.
Otherwise these meetings will be forever long.
Okay.
I want to thank everybody that came out today. Thank you for not speaking out. Again, the purpose of this and the other bill was so that you can kind of get an understanding where everybody's at. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Look for a motion to,
Adjourn?
yes, I'll second that one, and we're adjourned. Thank you.